Hey folks, Post here, welcome back to another Pokemon Masters video, and before we get into this is like my third time recording this video. Actually fourth time recording this video, because the last 3 times, for some reason, my OBS just decided to, stop halfway the video in, and hopefully this is gonna be the last time I need to record this, and it doesn't close on me again. So, anyways, let's get into today's topic. So basically, what we're gonna do today is go over the lucky skills, all the lucky skills in the game. Well, not all, like the main important ones. Mainly, we're gonna focus on the, I guess, what are these called? Crunchy lucky cookies, and just see which lucky skill is better for which kind of sync pairs. So, anyways, let's get into this. So, let's actually let's get through so we're mainly gonna focus on the crunchy skills. So let's quickly go over the other ones. There really isn't much to talk about with the other ones. The creamy cookies and chewy cookies and crispy cookies. So basically, creamy lucky cookies, like most of these are just to mitigate, stat reductions. All the stats, attack, defense, speed, special attack, yada yada, right? So there's a few ones that I do want to highlight. First of all, moves that do lower like certain stats. Mainly Leaf Storm and Draco Meteor, Sceptile and Rayquaza and gang, right? Who do lower their own special attack when using these moves. It would be nice if you get them Dauntless, which prevents special attack reduction, or just completely mitigates, or just completely prevents special attack reduction. So just imagine Sceptile, as strong as it already is, with Leaf Storm that does not lower your special attack at all. Same with Rayquaza. Max 20 out of 25 out of 5 Rayquaza. Draco Meteor does not lower your special attack. That's pretty crazy. That's pretty crazy. So, yeah, those are the main ones that you do want to look out for. I guess some of the other ones is just maybe like for Lucario or Charizard, or like Olivia. Some of these defense or special defense or reduction preventions. For Olivia, special defense reduction prevention, so when you use Hard as Diamonds, the reduction in your special defense doesn't happen, so don't die as easily to special attacks. And also, Charizard and Lucario, every time they use their moves, close combat and Charizard's whatever the trainer move, right? So you don't lower the your defenses, especially for Lucario. Every time you use close combat, it's just you're just close combating your way into your grave, because once you get that -6 on both defenses, you're gonna get caught. you're gonna get taken out relatively easily for Lucario. As for Charizard, same thing, except it's not as bad. The lowest you get is to -2, and it's just, I guess, a replacement for a Synchrid slot, right? So you don't have to waste 10 energy going picking up what was it called? Status Quo, right? For My Destiny. I think it's called My Destiny. Which I presume I wouldn't spend 10. I wouldn't spend 10 energy points on that. So, moving on, let's go over the creamy cookies real quick. So creamy cookies, they're basically not creamy cookies. The next ones are crispy cookies. There's the one that protects you from status effects. There's not much to say here either. Like the main ones, tanks. It would be nice to give tanks anti-DOT effects. So because tanks, if you guys played with Mew before, or one of the tankiest units of the game, once promoted the tankiest unit in the game, Mew is incredibly tanky. Takes almost no damage from attacks, but if you do get poisoned or burned, Mew just completely crumbles, right? So tanks, it would be really nice for tanks, Mew, Rotom, to get DOT prevention. Mew does have the natural cure, I think it's called, or something, that does cure it once, but sometimes they kind of spam those. So it'd be nice to have DOT prevention on them. But otherwise, the only other one I do kind of want to talk about is Confusion for our Outrage users, mainly Haxorus and Rayquaza. For Rayquaza, it's pretty straightforward. Just get the confusion prevention for Rayquaza, and then you could start using Outrage Rayquaza. That would be really awesome. But for Haxorus, I'd recommend not picking that up. I'd recommend picking up the one that reduces, that lessens, I guess, confusion, or whatever it's called. This one, lessen confusion, which reduces the chance of attacking oneself due to confusion. So we'll still have the confusion status, but it's just going to be super rare that we'd attack or hit ourselves in confusion with Haxorus, just because Haxorus Synchro does have a skill that boosts our damage every time we're confused. So that would be pretty nice, right? So there's that. And again, other than those, I mean, Sand Shelter, maybe if you want to use that with like the sand boosting move, but otherwise, you know, it's whatever. And then last one, I guess, called Chewy Lucky Cookies. These are lucky skills that reduces damage when the Pokemon is attacked by a certain type, right? So these are pretty straightforward. So you either use it against enemies that have a pretty, you know, some pretty common typings that you face, or enemies that typings are usually you're super effective against because you will be using type effectiveness a lot, or maybe enemies or types that that are super effective against you. Although this isn't as common because usually you won't be bringing a Pokemon into a battle that your opponent's super effective against you, right? Although there is one exception that I do want to highlight real quick, which is Dragon. Dragon Guard. This is reduced by Dragon move, just because of the nature of Dragon types. Dragon types are super effective against Dragon types, and that's the only type that they're super effective against, so you'll always be fighting Dragon types. So for those Dragon types who are super effective, or who do have a Dragon for weakness, probably best to pick up Dragon Guard, since you're always going to go against Dragon types anyways. So let's get into the main, well, I guess the prelude to the main course, because a lot of these skills are kind of mediocre, and there's basically 2 skills in the Crunchy Lucky Cookies that are just head and shoulders above the rest, and we'll talk about those later. We'll go over all of them first, and we'll skip the really good ones because those need really detailed dives into, which we'll save for later. So let's go over them one by one first. So Power Reserve, this is whatever. Like, it boosts your HP when your HP, or not boosts your HP, it boosts your moves, powers up your moves when your HP is low. This is just way too unpredictable. It's like too hard to control. It's incredibly unreliable. It would be kind of useful on units that do have endurance, right? It's situationally useful with on units that have endurance, but otherwise incredibly hard to control and unreliable. I mean, damage is fine. Like, it's good damage, but it's like it's just way too risky. Moving on, Surging Sand. Oh, that's what it's called. Surging Sand. Surging Sand powers up moves in Sandstorm, and it goes up to 3, which is a pretty decent multiplier. But like, Sand does have its issues. First of all, it's super hard to set up. It just lasts for a few turns. It slows down the whole game, the animation, especially if you're in co-op. And the most annoying part now in single player, which would, you know, Sand was like fine in single player before, but now in single player it's kind of annoying, just because of the fact that you get chip damage, and Battle Villa is single player, and like the chip damage, it's not even fair. Like, opponents have way more HP than we do, so like the chip damage the opponents take is like nothing, and like the chip damage we take is like huge in comparison. So the chip damage is bad, especially in Battle Villa, where HP is incredibly important. So are you really going to trade that like 30% boost for like whatever chip damage you're taking from Sandstorm? It's gonna be extremely situational, right? Very situational, not that great. Moving on, Gritty. This is probably one of the worst ones here, or I guess well, it's not. Let's rephrase that. One of the most situational ones. So Gritty 3 powers up moves if the Pokemon is affected by a status condition. Extremely situational. It completely depends on your opponent, unless you're Chandelure, which Chandelure can burn itself. So if it's on Chandelure, then good. Really good on Chandelure, mediocre on everyone else. It's like it's so situational that, like, even in the right situations where your opponent does have status moves, it might not even be useful at all, just because like in single player matches, your tank draws the aggro, and you want Gritty on your striker, so your striker would deal more damage. But the tank draws the aggro, so the tank's gonna get hit by the status conditions first. And like, what the heck? You just don't even get it at all. So, Greedy's not that great. Super duper effective. This is probably one of the better ones here. Just because, like, most of the time you're gonna use your strikers against, of course, that you're super effective against anyways, unless it's like Red or Olivia or Steven or Brennan or Mewtwo or Torkoal against just like everything, I guess. But you know, just generally your units will be using super effective moves. Multiplier's not that great, but it's just really it's just generally useful. Moving on, Power Flux and Critical Strike 2. Power Flux 3, Critical Strike 2, these are the ones we're going to talk about in a bit. These are extremely powerful. We're going to go over them in a bit. Let's just go over the rest here. So, Power Chain, pretty straightforward. Like, Power Chain, really good in co-op. Completely useless in single player just because there's no unity bonus in single. That's not a thing. You get 0 in single player. But you do get a decent boost in co-op. And in co-op, I mean, most of the time you should be able to get it. Sometimes if you're like playing with randos and no one knows what each other is doing, the pace is weird and all that. Maybe sometimes you guys could mess this up and it just takes a while to get a unity, but generally you'll, like, sooner or later, like, it's not that hard to get unity. Moving on, hit and run. So these skills are kind of like similar, and so I won't like go over why they're good or bad in each one. So for the first one, hit and run. So this has a chance to raise the Pokemon speed after it uses a move. Speed is nice, but like the chances to proc this in comparison to like how often you use moves are just kind of whatever. Especially if it's like a 3 gauge or 4 gauge move user, like the chances to proc these are just really not that great. I mean, speed is good for them, but it's just not that great of a chance to proc. And for like the lower move gauge users, 2 or 1 gauge users, this is much easier to proc this skill. But on the other hand, like, dude, you're like a 1 gauge or 2 gauge move user. Speed is not that important unless you are a tank or a tech unit. If you're a support or whatever, right? You're on the side. You're trying to either contribute to unity if you're in co-op, or if you're in or I guess in both scenarios, you just want to get your sync move quicker. You're just spamming 1 or 2 gauge moves to get your sync move up quick. Then sure, that will be really great because you're contributing to your whole team's move gauge in single player, right? So there's that. But otherwise, just kind of eh. So moving on, Mad Strength. This is the same as the last one, except this is raised attack. Obviously, completely useless on special type strikers, and situationally useful on physical type strikers. Like most of the time, for again like 3 gauge, 4 gauge users, it's just hard to proc them. And honestly, you don't have time to proc them. Like for a lot of physical strikers, you have like X attack or something similar to that anyway, so you're just gonna go up and straight up just proc your own very reliable buff instead, and then start going ham. Maybe if you're lucky, you'll get like 2 X attacks in, and then during your attacks you get 2 of these procs, so you get up to +6. But otherwise, again, it's just harder to proc. Much better for lower move gauges, stuff like Pincer, right? Pincer would be, Mad Strength would be really great with Pincer, but otherwise, again, just hard to use. Defensive Crush, same thing with Mad Strength, completely useless on special strikers, or like a special team, I guess, relying on a special striker. But the physical, it's not bad, right? Moving on, Stoic. This is defense. This is probably like the best of all of these, just because like defense wasn't that useful before, but it's much more important now because of Battle Villa, right? Everyone knows how important defense and those stats are in Battle Villa right now. So Stoic's probably one of the better ones, but like none of them are like amazing. So Stoic, I mean, it's really great for stuff like Glacia, right? Glacia, if you're spamming like 1 bar powder, snow, you have a decent chance of getting Stoic, right? Or any of the other, tanks, supports, techs that's spamming those 1 or 2 gauge moves. Stoic's not bad. Moving on, Troublemaker raises the chance of success for status moves that inflict status conditions. Obviously, if you don't have a status condition inflicting move, completely useless. If you do have one, however, that does rely on chance, this is actually really good. So it just saves you turns, honestly. Just makes RNG less terrible for you. So there's that. Okay, now moving on to the big dogs here, being Power Flux 3 and Critical Strike 2. So when I first saw Power Flux 3 being in the Lucky skills, I kind of dismissed it just because my personal experiences with and this is perfect. This is a perfect example of confirmational bias on my part. I thought every time I used a unit that had Power Flux, it was just whatever. It just like potato damage, and right. So I thought Power Flux was just whatever, and Critical Strike was the clear best option, and Critical Strikes too is still really good, but there are situations where Power Flux is better, and we'll go into these. So Critical Strike is powers up attacks if they become critical hits, and Power Flux is the fuller the move gauge, the more this powers up move. So let's go over to a post on Reddit by JMac, JMac himself actually, who posted on both the Power Masters Reddit and the Reddit Discord, going over their findings about Power Flux, as well as in comparison to Critical Strike. So they had a few revelations that I completely was I didn't know about before. So first of all, the first revelation is that Power Flux's multiplier is not additive. It's a multiplicative, okay, whatever. It's a separate multiplier that multiplies into your other multipliers. So that just makes it so much more powerful. And also the gauge situation, I always thought before that the gauge depended on like how many gauges you had left after you selected the move, but apparently it's prior to selecting the move, so that's much better. So anyways, let's just quickly go over how Critical Strike works. So we have a standard that we could compare Power Flux to, since there's much less variables in Critical Strike 2 in comparison to Power Flux, right? So let's go into the calculator real quick. So Critical Strike, Critical Strike 2, that's a 20% boost, so that's a 1.2 times multiplier. So if you go ahead and do the math over here, your regular crit that's 1.5. 1.5 times your multiplier on Critical Strike 2, that's 1.2, and there you go, 1.8. So what I thought before, and we all had this misconception about Critical Strike as well, is that we thought that Critical Strike was also additive, so we thought it was supposed to be like 1.5 plus 1.2, but it's not. It's 1.5 times 1.2. So instead of 1.7, we get 1.8 over here. So keep in mind, this is the standard that we're gonna compare all the various scenarios with Power Flux against the Critical Strike, right? So before I get into this, I'll just talk about like the obvious differences and uses. So for those who don't really care into going into like the nitty-gritty, like, because like the differences aren't that, like, in a lot of scenarios the differences aren't that big, but in some scenarios the difference is actually kind of huge. But just the general differences, Critical Strike much better to be used on users who do have built-in crits themselves, so you don't have to rely on a support to give you crits, so you'll always have Critical Strike active. And Power Flux is just better on folks who don't have to rely on that, and also folks who do use higher move gauge moves. So let's go over and kind of justify that. So remember, the multiplier for Critical Strike is 1.8. That's a magical number. So let's go over some scenarios here. Let's go over the worst case scenario for 3 gauge moves, and let's go over the formula first. So the formula is F times C plus F times G. F equals flux level. In this case, we're talking about Power Flux 3, so that's going to be 3. C is move cost, so that's 3 as well. Let's just go with the formula first. Let's not plug in numbers. So flux level times move cost plus flux level times the gauges that you had prior to selecting the move equals M, which is the multiplier. So again, let's use a 3 gauge move. Let's go for the absolute worst scenario for a 3 gauge move, right? That worst scenario would be G equals 3. So the gauges that you had prior to selecting your move is 3, which is the minimum amount of gauges you need to activate a 3 gauge move, obviously, right? So worst case scenario, flux level 3, move cost 3, 9, plus flux level 3, move gauge 3, 9. 9 plus 9, that's 18. That's 1.18 of a multiplier already. Those who know math know it's going to be less, but let's see how much less. So equals 1.77. So it's 3% less damage than what Critical Strike would do. So this is the worst case scenario for Power Flux, right? For a 3 gauge move, it does 3% less. So let's go 1 gauge over. So 1 gauge over, that G is gonna equal to 4. This is still the same, 9. 3 times 3 is still 9, and then 3 times 3 times 4, that's 12. So that's gonna be 21. Again, those who do know a bit of math here, this is going to be slightly obvious that you will be doing slightly more damage here. So it's 1.815. So the differences here really aren't too large. So for 3-bar moves, the difference really isn't too large, unless you go into a scenario where somehow like you just have consistent 3 bars for your striker, right? Or not 3 bars, consistent 6 bars. If a consistent 6 bar is the case, let's go over that case. So this is the best case scenario for 3-bar strikers with Power Flux 3. So that's 3 times 3, again 9. 9 plus 3 times 6, that's 18. So that's what, 24, right? So let me just quickly check. 3, 6, 18. 18 plus, how much was this again? 9. No, that's not 24. 18 plus 18 plus 9, that's 27, right? So 1.5 times 1.27, 1.9. Now that's a whole 10.05% boost. Or not 10 point. No, it's 10.5 point percentages higher than critical strike 2. So that's the best case scenario, but you don't really get that scenario a lot with the 3 gauge moves. So let's go over the next scenario, which is 4 gauge moves. So 4 gauge moves is a much different scenario. So 4 gauge moves, that's at the moment in the game, there's only 2 moves that are for 4 gauges, if I remember correctly, right? We got Blast Burn in Charizard and Hyper Beam with Dragonite. So Blast Burn in Charizard, Hyper Beam with Dragonite. Let's first acknowledge the fact that Dragonite doesn't have any boost himself. So we're gonna, in this scenario, we're gonna have supports for Dragonite, which is generally what people do with Dragonite anyways. So for Charizard, the flex level is still 3. So let's calculate the worst case scenario for Charizard first. Worst case scenario, flex level 3, move cost 4, 12. 12 plus 3 times 4, 12 plus 12, that's 1.24, right? 1.5. Where is, I can't even see the symbol. Oh, there he is. 2 point, or not 2.4. Let me correct that. 1.24, and we get 1.86. So that's 6% more damage in the worst case scenario for 4 gauge moves with the users that have 4 gauge moves, right? So that's 6% more. It's not that big of a deal, but let's go to the best case scenario. And the reason why we should probably put a bit more emphasis on the best case scenarios for 4 gauge move users and 3 gauge move users is just because of the specific Pokemon that we're looking at. One being Charizard, the other being Dragonite. Both Charizard and Dragonite can get to 6 gauge really easily. They have a lot of mechanics. Well, first of all, the obvious one, when the game starts, you're really close to 6 gauge, right? And you're buffing anyway, so at the start of the game, you will get basically you'll guarantee to get a 6 gauge move hit with your 4 gauge move. And in Charizard's case, Charizard, you have a passive that regens move gauges, which is still insane that he has that. So Charizard's passive regens move gauges, and also with the Synchro, with Rejuvenate, every time you use your sync move, you regain 6 move gauges. So every time you sync move, you get 6 move gauges back. So for Charizard, really easy to maintain 6 move gauges, a lot with Blast Burn. And for Dragonite, you have Now or Never, and also when you first come in, you have Now or Never, which you cut your HP in half. Lol. Much. Compare that to Charizard, that's just terrible. But it's still really good for Dragonite, because Dragonite just does so much raw damage, right? So with Hyper Beam, so you have Now or Never. You have 2 uses of that, right, which gets you to 6 move gauges every time. So both of these 4 move gauge users, they have a lot of scenarios where you will have your damage, your 4 gauge move used on a 6 move gauge scenario. So let's go over that scenario. So again, flex level 3 times 4, 12. 12 plus 3 times 6, 18. So that's 30. That's 1.3 times. So that's 1.5 times times 1.3. that gives us 1.95. That's 15% more damage. 15% more damage than what you get with Critical Strike. That's a lot of damage. That's a lot of extra damage that you get from Power Flux. So, yeah, this is pretty good. Power Flux is pretty good. So, like, even if you don't get, you know, the best case scenario every time, which you probably won't get, but if you, like, average, like, if you take, you know, you average them out, your 4 gauges and 6 gauges, like, just say you get, like, 5 every time, right? So, that's what, 15 plus 12, that's what, 27 or something, right? So that's still really good. 1 point, let me just check, 3, 4, 12 plus 15, yeah, 20, 1.27. That's still a lot of damage that you lay out there with Power Flux. So I guess in conclusion, when choosing between Power Flux 3 and Critical Strike, oh, one more thing we do have to consider: Power Flux, in comparison to Critical Strike does apply to sync moves, whereas Power Flux does not apply to sync moves. So keep that in mind as well. So sync nuke builds should probably pick up should probably pick up Critical Strike, but otherwise, for 4 gauge users, it does seem like Power Flux 3 is better. For all the other users, Critical Strike 2 is still better, right? And also, if you don't have any, if you don't have any Critical Strike built in to your striker, Power Flux is probably better, right? It's just much more reliable. So, anyways, there we go. Just a quick overview of which you know, lucky skills to try and roll for. And do keep in mind, if you don't get something that's like the most optimal, and again, this is just for folks who like min-maxing. If you play this casually, this probably isn't that big of a deal to you. But I mean, 15% that's a lot. That's a lot. But yeah, basically, do keep in mind that when you're rolling for lucky skills, if you get something that's like decent but like not what exactly you want, you keep on rolling them, because you know, once you get a new lucky skill, you get a new a lucky cookie, you use that, and then it lets you choose which one you want to keep. If you want to keep the old one, if the old one's better, then you keep the old one. If the new one's better, then you keep the new one. So that system's actually pretty good, thankfully, so it's not that random. So yeah, there we go. So basically, we talked about the differences between Power Flux 3 and Critical Strike 2 again. Thanks to JMac himself for providing us with this data, which does help clear things up a bit with Power Flux 3 and Critical Strike. So yeah, these two, again, probably generally are the best ones, just depends on which scenarios, right? And then it's probably super duper effective, and maybe, you know, one of these boosting moves, and then it's probably like Surging Sand, Powers, or like these are just so situational. Gritty 3 is just right? So again, that's me for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below about all this stuff, which skills you guys are trying to roll with each sync pair. Like and enjoy this video, so we're any challenge for some more Power Masters content. I'll see you guys in the next one.